Brandon Duran. Brandon Duran was born in 1980 in San Diego, California. Brandon's father was a motorcycle enthusiast and a former member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, which the FBI identifies as the second largest criminal organization in the world after the Hells Angels. Brandon's parents divorced when he was about 10 years old, but they stayed on good terms and shared responsibility for raising their son. As he grew up, Brandon developed a love for motorcycles similar to his father's. By the age of 25, he owned his own motorcycle, which he had built himself and treasured deeply. Brandon's life took a difficult turn in April 2005 when his father died unexpectedly. To cope with his increasing depression, Brandon felt a strong need for change. He set out on a new adventure, traveling to Las Vegas on his motorcycle. After living in Vegas for about a year, he met Amber Andrews, a 24-year-old woman who helped him forget his troubles. Their whirlwind romance quickly led to marriage just 2 months after they met. At the time, Amber was pregnant, and in December 2006 she gave birth to Brandon's son, Brando. The birth of his child marked a significant turning point in Brandon's life. He became a devoted, responsible father and husband, putting family before personal desires and working toward a well-paying career. In contrast, Amber's life showed little change. She continued to prioritize her social life, frequently attending biker events and parties, appearing unaffected by the arrival of her child. Consequently, the relationship between Brandon and Amber began to collapse quickly, often erupting into heated arguments. The deterioration of their marriage ultimately ended in divorce 4 years after their wedding. Brandon was awarded full custody of their son, primarily due to his ability to provide a stable environment for himself and his child, something Amber was unable to offer. After the divorce was finalized in 2010, Amber moved back to her hometown of Meeker, Oklahoma, while Brandon returned to San Diego with their son. Brandon was glad to be reunited with his family, who had supported him in raising his son. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Over time, the emotional scars from his failed marriage began to mend, and Brandon once again felt hopeful about the future. However, in the summer of 2012, Amber appeared at his door. His ex-wife expressed a desire to reconcile, asking him to give their relationship another chance. The emotions Brandon had tried hard to bury resurfaced. He trusted in Amber's sincerity and agreed to start over. Their son, Brando, was preparing to begin kindergarten, and Amber suggested that the three of them travel to Oklahoma to visit her parents, who wished to meet their grandson. Brandon agreed, and together they prepared for the trip, planning to spend about a week in Oklahoma. A few days before Brandon, Amber, and their son were scheduled to return to San Diego, Van Emblome contacted the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Emblome reported that a friend had asked him for help disposing of a body, claiming it was that of Brandon Duran. The individual who sought Emblome's help was identified as Justin Hammer, age 30, from Garvin County. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation then alerted the local sheriff's office about a possible crime, prompting the sheriff and his deputy to visit the farm owned by Justin. Police also reached out to Brandon's relatives in San Diego, who confirmed that they had not heard from Brandon for several days. Authorities decided not to reveal details to Brandon's family until they verified the information Emblome had provided. During questioning, Justin unexpectedly admitted to killing Brandon Duran. However, he insisted that the act was committed in self-defense, portraying Brandon as a menacing biker gang member who had threatened him. According to Justin, on August 7th, Brandon rode up to his house on his motorcycle, kicked open the door with his foot, entered, and began issuing threats. Justin claimed to have a close connection with Amber, which appeared to be the motive for Brandon's visit. Brandon allegedly told Justin to stay away from Amber, warning that if he failed to comply, Brandon's biker club associates would ensure his disappearance. Brandon also threatened to harm Justin's family members if he refused to comply. In response to these threats, Justin allegedly seized a nearby handgun and fired. After Brandon was killed, Justin, fearing retaliation from the motorcycle club, chose not to notify the police. Instead, he decided to conceal any evidence of the crime. He moved the body into the bathroom, where he used a saw to dismember it, then placed the remains into 5 paint buckets and sealed them with cement. However, the combined weight of the buckets, made heavier by the cement, rendered them too heavy for Justin to load into his pickup truck on his own. He asked his friend Emblome for assistance, who helped him, but then promptly reported Justin to the authorities and left the location. Justin then transported the buckets to his farm and disposed of them in a small pond. After discarding the body, Justin meticulously cleaned the house and subsequently burned all the cleaning tools, gloves, and rags he had used. To get rid of Brandon's motorcycle, Justin handed it to a relative, who unknowingly dismantled it for spare parts, unaware of its true origin. Police later arrived in Meeker to deliver the tragic news to Amber after recovering 5 submerged buckets from the pond. She was stunned to learn of Brandon's death, despite their separation, as the couple had intended to reunite and resume living together. Amber explained that she had argued with Brandon the day before, after he discovered her relationship with Justin. Following their quarrel, Brandon left on his motorcycle, declaring that he would take matters into his own hands and confront her lover. This version of events initially appeared believable, but a new development soon came to light in the investigation. Criminologists examining Justin's residence uncovered evidence that conflicted with his narrative. Justin had first claimed that Brandon had forced his way in by kicking open the door, but it was later determined that the door had actually been kicked from the inside. Shoe impressions on the door matched the soles of Justin's sneakers, confirming that Justin himself had kicked it. Additional findings included a gun safe containing a written list of items for disposing of a body, along with both a pistol and a shotgun. This discovery implied that the crime could have been premeditated rather than an impulsive act. Moreover, a doghouse retrieved from the pond was discovered to be packed with cement, containing debris that did not correspond to the contents of the 5 buckets previously recovered. Justin was charged with first-degree murder based on the evidence gathered. A forensic pathologist examined 25 parts of Brandon's body and determined that he had been shot 4 times in the head. The autopsy revealed that Brandon had been struck 3 times with a pistol and once with a shotgun, with the shotgun blast being the final shot. According to the expert, the shotgun wound occurred after Brandon was already dead and lying on the ground. This conclusion contradicted Justin's testimony, in which he claimed to have fired only 1 shot with the shotgun. Investigators considered Justin's account suspicious, as he failed to explain why he would use a shotgun after firing 3 pistol shots, particularly when Brandon was already deceased. This contradiction raised numerous doubts and suggested the possibility of another individual's involvement in the murder. News of Brandon's death devastated his mother, Cindy, when police informed her. Once she regained her composure, Cindy clarified that Brandon had never been a member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. She attributed his passion for motorcycles to his father, who had shared the same interest with him. However, Cindy's account also revealed an important detail. Brandon's motorcycle had broken down before his trip to Oklahoma, so he had loaded it into the back of his pickup truck with the intention of repairing it after arriving there. Cindy further mentioned that her son disliked confrontational situations, and she believed his ex-wife, Amber, was the root of all his troubles. Amber's infidelity had undermined their relationship from the beginning, and even after their son was born, she continued her unfaithful lifestyle. Whenever Brandon disagreed with her, Amber would become combative and start arguments. This eventually led to their divorce, in which Brandon was awarded full custody of their son, a decision that deeply angered Amber. In retaliation, Amber abandoned her child for over a year, showing no concern for Brandon's life. Therefore, when she unexpectedly returned asking for another chance, both Brandon and his family were stunned and unsettled. To gain further clarity, the police focused their investigation on Amber, aware of her involvement with Justin. Amber initially claimed that Brandon had left on his motorcycle after their argument. Brandon's family, however, refuted this claim, insisting that the motorcycle had already broken down. The question arose: if the motorcycle had not been seriously damaged, why would Brandon transport it to Oklahoma instead of repairing it at home? Amber, for her part, never mentioned Brandon working on the motorcycle. She also claimed that after Brandon left to confront Justin, she went to see a doctor. However, police found no records of her visiting any medical facility in the city that day. This meant Amber had no verifiable alibi. A crucial breakthrough came when investigators learned that Amber had arranged for a friend to babysit her son on the day Brandon died. The friend arrived around 3 p.m., at which point Amber and Brandon left together in Brandon's pickup truck with the motorcycle loaded in the back. Notably, Amber deliberately left her phone at home and did not return for 8 hours. When Amber finally returned, neither Brandon nor the motorcycle were in the truck. By examining her phone, police found a text message received just before she and Brandon had left the house. The message, sent by Justin, read, "Ink is ready." Authorities interpreted this as a signal that preparations had been made to deal with Brandon. Interviews with Amber's close friends revealed that she had no genuine desire to reunite with her ex-husband and frequently spoke negatively about him. She resented Brandon for winning custody of their son and described him as strict and inflexible. Handwriting analysis later confirmed that Amber had written a note found in Justin's safe listing materials needed to dispose of a body. Surveillance footage from a local store further supported this theory, showing Justin purchasing buckets and other items from Amber's list the day before Brandon's death. While awaiting trial, Justin insisted that he had acted alone and in self-defense, claiming he was only trying to protect Amber, who remained free at the time. He argued that the items Amber had listed were intended for household repairs, not for covering up a killing. He also maintained that he had used both a pistol and a shotgun, bizarrely claiming he held one weapon in each hand, a version of events investigators found highly implausible. What was expected to be a long and complex trial ended much sooner than anticipated. After just about 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict, recommending a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Austin expressed her satisfaction with the verdict, stating that it was appropriate and delivered justice to the family of the victim, Brandon Duran. Cindy Ware, Brandon's mother, felt relieved with the jury's decision after nearly 2 years of waiting. In October 2014, Justin Hammer was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, Amber was arrested and charged with first-degree murder of her husband Brandon, desecration of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a crime. Amber pleaded not guilty and hoped to be released on bail. Sitting in the courtroom in handcuffs and wearing a prison jumpsuit, Amber expressed her wish to be at home with her son. Seeking the chance to remain with him until her trial, Amber requested bail from the court. However, District Judge Jeff Virgin, who had traveled from Norman to preside over the jury trial, sided with the prosecution's request and denied Amber bail. The trial began in the spring of 2017, more than 2 years after the crime. Amber Andrews pleaded not guilty, with her attorney arguing that she had not been present at the scene. But prosecutors Christy Miller and Jennifer Austin contended that Amber was the one with the motive to kill Brandon Duran. Prosecutor Christy argued that Amber orchestrated the entire plan, luring Brandon to her lover's home, where Justin shot him 3 times with a pistol. Amber then allegedly delivered the final shotgun blast. Christy emphasized to the jury that every witness statement and all the evidence presented directly implicated Amber in the murder. Christy declared that the only person who wanted Brandon gone was Amber. The only one with a motive was Amber Andrews. The only person with a reason to eliminate him was her. Amber needed Brandon not just dead, but erased completely. She had the motive, and Justin provided the place where the act could be carried out. Together, they thought they had devised the perfect scheme. According to Christy, Amber's motive was to eliminate Brandon so she could regain custody of their young son. On the day Brandon died, Amber had been away for 8 hours, and there was no solid proof supporting her alibi. Christy asserted that Amber actively helped Justin dispose of Brandon's body and clean up the house afterward. She did not want her son raised by a man she despised, and when she realized she could not win custody legally, she resolved to get rid of Brandon permanently. Defense attorney Jay Mendros argued that the prosecution had failed to produce any evidence directly connecting Amber to the crime. He stressed this point to the jury, stating that the absence of evidence had caused the prosecution to unfairly target her character. He maintained that Amber was not a cold-blooded murderer and had not planned the killing. According to attorney Jay Mendros, Justin committed the act out of fear of losing Amber, which was further intensified by the fact that Brandon had traveled to Oklahoma in hopes of reconciling with Amber, while Justin, who had been in a relationship with her for a year, felt threatened by the chance of losing her to Brandon. The defense contended that Justin had a strong motive to kill Brandon because he was caught in a complicated love triangle. The attorney further argued that the prosecution had misinterpreted the testimony and actions of those involved. The defense insisted that no one should be convicted based on speculation or suspicion. In this case, the only concrete evidence was Justin Hammer's confession, in which he fully accepted responsibility and claimed to have acted alone. After listening to more than 4 hours of closing arguments at the Garvin County Courthouse, the jury returned a guilty verdict. They recommended a life sentence for Amber Andrews, age 35. Sentencing was scheduled for June 12, 2017. On the day of the trial, Amber Andrews appeared to be in a cheerful mood. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, tearfully took the witness stand to describe how her son's death had affected both her and her grandson. Cindy addressed Amber directly, telling her that the loss of her son had destroyed all of her dreams. She stressed that Brandon had only wanted to be with his family, and that Amber's actions had stripped that away from him. Cindy also said that Brandon would never get the chance to teach her son how to snowboard, something he had been excited to do. Looking directly at Amber, she shook her head up and down and declared that it was the work of the devil. The judge sentenced Amber Andrews to life in prison without the possibility of parole for her involvement in the first-degree murder of Brandon Duran. She was also given additional sentences, 7 years for desecrating Brandon's remains and 10 years for conspiracy to commit a felony. Amber Andrews is currently serving her time at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in Oklahoma, while her co-defendant Justin Hammer is serving his sentence at the Oklahoma State Prison. Brandon's son, Brando, was placed in the custody of the Oklahoma Department of Human Services in August 2012 and went to live with a foster family. In January 2013, after Brandon's family battled the court system, Brando was permitted to return to San Diego to live with his grandmother. At last, after 5 years of legal struggles, Brando's grandmother, Cindy, was granted full custody of her grandson. It was only after the trial ended that Cindy and her family felt it was time to explain to Brando the truth about the court's ruling and what had happened to his mother, Amber Andrews. Moving on to the next case. Diana Diello. Diana Diello was born in 1959 in Tustin, a suburb of Los Angeles. Her father served in the military, while her mother was employed at a local garment factory. At 19, Diana met Kevin Green during an incident at a bar where she was harassed by several men. Kevin intervened, drove them off, and in gratitude, Diana bought him a drink. A few days later, they went on their first date, and their relationship quickly deepened. At the time, Kevin was in the process of divorcing his first wife. Before long, Kevin and Diana moved in together, and Diana became pregnant. Once Kevin's divorce was finalized, the couple married. While awaiting the birth of their daughter, they rented an apartment in Tustin. Kevin was employed as a helicopter mechanic at a nearby Marine Corps base, while Diana, who had previously worked with her mother in the garment factory, stayed home to prepare for the baby's arrival. By late September 1979, Diana was nearly 9 months pregnant. On the night of September 30th, the couple got into an argument after watching a movie. The stress of the approaching birth had begun to strain their relationship. In order to defuse the situation and avoid further conflict, Kevin decided to leave and drove to a nearby restaurant. About 40 minutes later, Kevin phoned the local police to report that his wife had been shot and urgently needed medical assistance. Officers arrived at the apartment shortly after his call. Inside, they found Diana lying on the bed, covered in blood, with what initially appeared to be a gunshot wound to the head. Upon closer examination, paramedics determined the injury had actually been inflicted by blunt force trauma. When the police found Diana still alive, they provided immediate aid until the ambulance arrived, at which point they instructed Kevin to leave the room. After paramedics took over and carefully transported Diana to the hospital, officers asked Kevin to remain behind to give a statement. Kevin explained that he and Diana had argued, and he decided to step out to calm down and went to purchase burgers from a fast food restaurant. In his rush, he realized he had forgotten his keys inside, but decided not to return for them. Instead, he locked the door and went straight to his car. As Kevin drove out of the apartment complex, he noticed a truck with its back door open and an African-American man moving back and forth toward it. It was late, close to 2 a.m. Kevin went to his usual fast food restaurant, but since it was crowded, he continued on to another one a few miles away. After purchasing a burger, he began the 40-minute drive home. Upon arriving, he saw the front door wide open. He hurried inside and discovered Diana lying covered in blood. He immediately called the police. Kevin's account raised some suspicions, but when officers checked the fast food bag, they confirmed the food was still warm, and the receipt verified both the time and location of the purchase, lending credibility to his statement. As a result, police permitted Kevin to go to the hospital, though they first requested a blood sample for their investigation. While DNA testing was not yet available, specialists could still compare Kevin's blood type with blood evidence from the crime scene. Once Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors determined her head injury had not been caused by a gunshot. Instead, it appeared to have been inflicted with a small, blunt, heavy object. Tragically, Diana slipped into a coma. The medical team worked tirelessly for several hours to save both her and her unborn child. After prolonged efforts, they managed to stabilize Diana, though surgery was still required. As part of the investigation, police requested that medical experts determine whether Diana had been sexually assaulted. The examination confirmed that she had been, with semen detected on her body. Kevin, however, testified that he and Diana had engaged in sexual intercourse only hours before their argument. Both Diana's and Kevin's families remained at the hospital throughout the night. And the following morning, the baby's condition unexpectedly deteriorated. Despite the doctor's efforts, the child did not survive. Although Diana remained in a coma, her chances of survival improved, but physicians cautioned that she might face long-term complications. Even though Kevin presented an alibi, investigators were reluctant to clear him completely because of multiple inconsistencies in his account. He had argued with Diana only hours before the attack, left the front door unlocked, and spent a suspicious amount of time on what should have been a short trip for fast food. His report of seeing a suspicious individual near the apartment late at night also raised doubts. Still, there was no solid evidence directly tying Kevin to the crime. Police shifted their attention to another possible suspect connected to a string of similar attacks in the area. The year before, a series of break-ins and assaults had occurred in Tustin and nearby towns, all following the same pattern. In December 1978, a 17-year-old girl was beaten with a wooden object, sexually assaulted, and killed. 4 months later, a 21-year-old woman was also murdered and sexually assaulted. In July 1979, another woman was attacked in her apartment. She survived but remained in a coma for several weeks, and her testimony provided no useful leads. Just weeks before Diana's assault, in September 1979, a 34-year-old woman was murdered under nearly identical circumstances. Investigators became convinced they were facing a serial killer and concentrated their resources on apprehending him. To address the public's fear, authorities issued warnings through the media, particularly advising women who lived alone or in low-rise apartments, as they seemed to be the preferred targets. The warning created widespread panic, prompting police to increase nighttime patrols in vulnerable areas. Officers began canvassing neighborhoods and soon gathered their first leads. Several victims' neighbors reported sightings of a suspicious white man with thick, dark hair near their residences. Although the description was vague, police were able to identify several possible matches and opened investigations into them. Unfortunately, these leads did not result in any cases. 1 week after Diana was attacked, her doctors informed her loved ones that she had finally regained consciousness. However, there was a serious concern. Diana was unable to speak or remember anything. According to her doctors, her brain was still in the process of recovery. Around the same time, another assault occurred in Tustin. An unidentified attacker broke into the apartment of a 24-year-old woman, striking her several times with a piece of wood before sexually assaulting her. Tragically, the victim died, and once again, the police were unable to apprehend the perpetrator. Diana spent several days in the hospital recovering from her injuries. During this period, her mind gradually cleared, but she had lost nearly all of her memory. Doctors informed her family that her memories could return, but warned them not to remind her of anything, advising instead that she should recall events naturally. Once stabilized, Diana was discharged from the hospital and taken home by her family. Since her husband Kevin had to continue working at the military base, Diana went to live with her parents. 2 weeks later, another assault occurred in the city, similar to the one against Diana. This time, the attacker killed a 17-year-old girl. Diana began physical therapy sessions, and her condition slowly improved. Although she still could not speak or remember the attack, a breakthrough came 6 weeks later during a therapy session. The doctor asked Diana whether she remembered who had attacked her. To the doctor's surprise, Diana suddenly pointed to her wedding ring. The doctor relayed this information to Diana's mother when she came to pick her up. Diana's mother asked her daughter if her husband, Kevin, was the one who had attacked her and Diana nodded. Diana's mother immediately took her to the police station to speak with the chief. After asking Diana a few additional questions, the police confirmed that she remembered her attacker and identified him as her husband, Kevin. This new information drastically altered the direction of the investigation. Authorities began to suspect that Diana's assault was tied to the series of similar incidents in the area carried out by a serial offender. However, Kevin matched the description of the suspect, which led police to question whether he could be the one responsible for the attacks. The police asked Diana and her mother to pretend that Diana had not regained her memory and to return home with Kevin. They agreed to comply. In the meantime, the police closely monitored Kevin, keeping track of his every movement in the hopes of finding evidence connecting him to the serial murders. Crime scene testing uncovered crucial evidence beneath Diana's fingernails, where investigators found bloody skin particles in addition to the attacker's semen. After analyzing the samples, police discovered a match between the attacker's blood type and Kevin's blood sample, strongly indicating that Kevin had assaulted Diana. Regarding a possible motive, police suspected that Diana's refusal to have sex with Kevin may have triggered the assault. Although Kevin insisted that they had been intimate earlier that night, the police interviewed Diana, and she clearly recalled the attack, confirming that Kevin was indeed her attacker. During the conversation, Diana's mother stated that they could no longer live with Kevin, prompting the police to move forward with his arrest. To ensure the safety of Diana's family, Kevin was arrested at a store rather than at their home. Despite his arrest, Kevin continued to maintain his innocence. Preparations for the trial extended over 10 months, during which time Diana's health steadily improved. She regained her ability to speak, and she was ultimately cleared of any suspicion, while her husband was found guilty of assaulting her. Kevin's defense team attempted to rely on his fast food alibi, but it was not sufficient to disprove Diana's testimony. Consequently, Kevin was convicted in November 1980 of the child's murder, as well as the assault on Diana. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Police later learned that 2 similar crimes had occurred within their district prior to Kevin's arrest, but both victims had survived. Although the attacker's identity in those cases remained unknown, the incidents raised suspicions that Kevin may have been involved in other assaults. Notably, the attacks came to an abrupt halt after Kevin's arrest. Following his conviction, Diana quickly filed for divorce, which Kevin did not contest. Diana then focused on her recovery. When Kevin became eligible for parole, the committee denied his request, a decision that was repeated on 3 more occasions. The serial killer case remained unresolved until 1996, when police decided to reopen the investigation. Semen samples from the victims, which had been preserved in a laboratory, were retested. Police were determined to uncover the true culprit, and DNA analysis delivered a shocking revelation. Gerald Parker, a man who had been arrested the same year as Kevin, was identified as a DNA match to the serial murders. Once Parker's involvement in the bedroom basher killings was confirmed through DNA, investigators revisited the attack on Diana. Both Parker and Kevin had worked at the same military base, and Parker owned a dark-colored van, similar to the one described in the reports of the earlier assaults. During his initial interview with police years earlier, Kevin had reported seeing an African-American man near a dark-colored truck outside their home on the night of the attack. This detail led investigators to reconsider the possibility that Parker had been involved in Diana's assault. While Kevin remained behind bars, the local prosecutor informed him about the developments in the serial murder investigation. The prosecutor asked Kevin to submit a DNA sample, which he readily agreed to. While the DNA testing was in progress, investigators visited Parker in prison to confront him about the case. Although formal charges had not yet been filed against him for the assaults, detectives pressed him for details. At first, Parker denied any connection to the crimes. However, when questioned further about the attack on Diana, he began to open up. He admitted that on the night of the incident, he had driven his van to Kevin's neighborhood, intending to prowl the area by looking through ground-floor windows for potential victims. According to Parker, he then heard screaming coming from Kevin and Diana's apartment. After Kevin left the residence, Parker noticed the front door was unlocked. He waited a few minutes before going inside and assaulting Diana. Parker claimed that he did not know Kevin's wife personally, as they had worked in different sections of the military base. He went on to confess to committing 6 murders and 3 additional non-fatal assaults. After Parker's confession, DNA evidence conclusively proved his guilt and established Kevin's innocence. The prosecutors swiftly moved to overturn Kevin's conviction, and after serving 16 years in prison, Kevin was finally released. The case provoked widespread outrage, not only because an innocent man had lost nearly half his life behind bars, but also because it had taken authorities so long to identify the true killer. Upon his release, the state of California awarded Kevin $10,000 in compensation, a sum viewed as insultingly small. Years later, however, he received additional restitution, $100 for each day he spent imprisoned, totaling $620,000. Despite Kevin's exoneration, his wife Diana initially refused to believe in his innocence. She had previously testified that Kevin was her sole attacker. But after DNA recovered from her body was matched to Parker, she altered her account. Diana then claimed Kevin had attacked her first before leaving, and that Parker entered afterward and continued the assault. Parker, however, contradicted this version of events. He stated that when he entered the apartment, Diana was already lying on the bed with no visible injuries, and he admitted to being the one who struck her on the head. Diana's family put forward yet another theory, that Kevin and Parker may have conspired together. They argued this could explain why Kevin conveniently left the apartment unlocked the night of the attack. Still, Parker denied knowing Kevin, emphasizing that the military base where they both worked was vast, and it was common not to know fellow servicemen personally. Kevin also firmly denied any association with Parker, insisting that he never harmed Diana or their unborn daughter. He explained that he had left the door unlocked only because he didn't want to go back inside to retrieve his keys after their argument, a decision he admits he regrets to this day. As for Gerald Parker, he was sentenced to death in 1999. However, the sentence has never been carried out. Years later, California placed a moratorium on executions, leaving Parker to remain on death row, where he continues to be incarcerated to this day. Moving on to the next case. Eva Blanco. Eva Blanco came into the world on February 17, 1981 in Spain. Her father was Manuel Blanco, and her mother was Olga Puch. In 1997, Eva's family relocated to Alguit, a small town located near Madrid. They selected this place to experience a peaceful life, away from the noise and busyness of the capital. Among the three sisters, Eva, Rebecca, and Maria, Eva was recognized as the quietest girl when she was around her close friends and relatives. Yet, Eva always shone as a cheerful, reliable, and delightful companion. She was also very engaged in sporting activities, and this interest provided Eva with endless pleasure and happiness. At school, she was admired by many people for her charm and her kind, welcoming personality. Eva served as a good role model for her younger sisters and was a responsible girl. She always obeyed every rule laid down by her parents, including the curfew, so that they did not have to worry or become upset. However, on one fateful day, events did not unfold as expected. On the afternoon of April 19th, Eva and her friends spent time playing tennis, enjoying the carefree spirit of youth. They were unaware that this seemingly ordinary afternoon would soon turn grim and tragic. On Saturday evening, as the sun went down, they chose to go to a local disco to celebrate their close friendship and share time together until late at night. Eva asked her mother if she could return home later than usual. Olga, knowing her daughter was always responsible, agreed to let Eva stay until midnight before returning home. It was late in the night, and the clock struck 11:30. One after another, the group said their goodbyes and headed home, Eva included. She had no idea that her walk back would lead to perilous mysteries. Eva and her friend decided to use a shortcut across a vacant lot to reach home more quickly. It was a path she had used many times before, but destiny held other intentions for her. At 11:45 p.m., they went their separate ways, and Eva began walking through the familiar, dark vacant lot. As midnight neared, Eva's mother grew anxious when her daughter had not come back home. She reached out to Eva's friends for information, but they explained that they had already parted ways and that Eva was expected to be home by then. This increased her worry even more. She decided to inform her husband, who worked as a tow truck driver, and he quickly began searching for Eva throughout the town. Their nephew, a local police officer, and the father of one of Eva's friends soon joined in the search. At 1 a.m., Eva's parents officially reported their daughter missing at the local civil police station. However, they felt let down by the lack of concern shown by the police, who took more than an hour to register the missing persons report. The police minimized the seriousness of the case, suggesting that children of Eva's age were often using drugs and that she might be lying in a doorway or on the sidewalk. This clearly showed that they were not taking her disappearance seriously. During the night, Eva's father went to the local civil police station 15 times. He was deeply frustrated and openly criticized the agency for failing to quickly arrange a search for Eva. He accused the civil police of neglecting their responsibilities. However, the police rejected these accusations and explained that, following standard procedure, they would wait several hours before beginning a search for a missing individual. Meanwhile, Eva's father remained anxious, holding on to hope that his daughter would return safely. Yet, the actual reason for this delay still remains uncertain, adding to the family's despair and uncertainty. The search for Eva finally began at 2:30 a.m., with family, friends, and authorities combing through the town and the surrounding areas. Nevertheless, the police did not file a missing persons report until 8 a.m. By midday, Eva's family had contacted the local television channel Telemadrid, requesting coverage of the incident. At 9 a.m., Eva's body was found by two elderly people, 6 kilometers outside the town of Algete, near a road construction site linking Cobina and Belvis to Jarama. This location was frequently chosen by young couples seeking privacy in their cars. At first, the people who found her believed it was the result of a serious road accident, thinking that she had been struck by a vehicle. However, when the police reached the scene, they uncovered a far more horrifying reality. Eva had been savagely murdered, lying face down on the ground with numerous stab wounds. She was dressed in jeans, a dark sweater, and hiking boots, the same outfit she had worn on the day she disappeared. One sleeve of her jacket was missing, pointing to a violent struggle. Investigators believed that both Eva and her killer had arrived there by car. Yet, the heavy rainfall overnight erased tire marks and other important forensic traces. Despite the obstacles, investigators managed to locate Eva's faint footprints along with a vital clue: the footprints of a man wearing size 42 moccasins. These discoveries raised hopes of securing justice for the innocent victim. The police soon informed Eva's family of the finding of her body. According to the autopsy, Eva had been stabbed 19 times in the back and died from blood loss at approximately 4 a.m. The murder weapon was identified as a navacha knife, measuring 8 to 10 centimeters in length and 1 centimeter in width. Eva's death was a devastating tragedy for the community. The assault began while the victim was still inside the vehicle and continued as she tried escaping toward the roadside. The wounds, particularly those to the ear and the back of the head, revealed the savagery of the crime. The first stab was serious enough to be fatal. Forensic results confirmed that the victim was also sexually assaulted. DNA evidence from the same perpetrator was detected on her body and clothing, confirming this heinous act. Investigators also found a red cloth in the victim's mouth, later identified as material from a standard car seat cover. This detail indicates that Eva had been forced into the vehicle after being abducted. It reflects the agonizing final moments of the innocent victim. However, because the body was fully clothed and displayed no immediate outward signs of violence, investigators and police initially speculated that it could have been a consensual sexual encounter ending in a fatal dispute. Eva's parents insisted that their daughter had been kidnapped, raped, and murdered to eliminate evidence. They firmly rejected the notion that Eva had committed suicide. Police believed the case would soon be solved. Their theory was that an acquaintance of Eva's offered her a ride and took her to a secluded location, a popular spot for couples, where the crime unfolded. Police first suspected Eva's ex-boyfriend in Fuente El Saz, but he was cleared after being questioned. The focus of the investigation then shifted to men known to Eva's family, specifically individuals she might have trusted enough to accept a ride from. However, as the case grew more complicated, the police could not rule out the chance that the offender was a total stranger. Eva's friends, though, insisted that she would never willingly accept a ride from someone she did not know and believed she had been forced into the car. Adding to the enigma, several neighbors connected the crime to an unfamiliar blue car spotted in town near midnight, following another girl. The driver was described as a blonde man in his 20s. Sadly, no one noted the license plate number, leaving a crucial lead impossible to trace. As the investigation unfolded, investigators found unidentified male bodily fluids on Eva's clothing and body. Yet this information was withheld and never revealed to Eva's family or the public. At the same time, police secretly gathered DNA samples from men who were acquainted with or connected to Eva, in order to compare them with the DNA in the fluids. Eva's father Manuel's DNA was taken from a cigarette he had smoked while having coffee and discussing the case with police officers. Other samples were collected discreetly through alcohol tests or from cups left behind by suspects in bars. Even though no matches were discovered, the Civil Defense Police continued to believe that the offender was an adult male residing in Algiers or the nearby regions. The investigation pressed on while Eva's family longed to uncover the truth. 8 months after Eva's tragic death, her mother uncovered 2 secret diaries in her daughter's bedroom. The diaries dated from 1995 to 1996 and from 1996 to 1997, in which Eva documented the details of her daily life until the day she was killed. Most entries centered on Eva and her ex-boyfriend Miguel. Their names appeared repeatedly, written in different colored inks throughout the pages. Near the conclusion of the diary, Miguel's name was suddenly replaced by the sequence 343 to 110, while Eva's name remained unchanged. Despite repeated efforts to interpret the meaning of this number, no one has provided a convincing explanation. The real significance of the number remains a mystery, leaving both Eva's family and investigators unsettled by this haunting clue. After Manuel's DNA was ruled out as that of the suspect, he began a campaign urging the residents of Algiers to voluntarily provide DNA samples to assist with the investigation. With the mayor's backing, in November 1999 an official announcement was issued requesting that all males over the age of 16, around 5,000 individuals, submit hair or saliva samples. However, Spanish judicial authorities rejected the initiative, labeling it naive, inappropriate, and ineffective. They further argued that it could stigmatize anyone who refused to provide DNA, which was a legal right without a court order. They also believed that the real perpetrator would never willingly hand over his DNA sample. Eva's father nonetheless collected 2,013 DNA samples from residents of Algiers and neighboring towns and delivered them to the local court for a ruling. The judge asked the chief prosecutor of Madrid for an opinion on the legality of such testing. On March 30, 2000, the chief prosecutor emphasized that only individuals suspected in the investigation should be tested, not all volunteers. As a result, only 45 samples were examined, including 12 from Eva's relatives, acquaintances, and people with criminal records, particularly those involving sexual offenses and knife-related violence. Time passed, and the case went cold. But a breakthrough came when a woman reported to the authorities that she had seen a suspicious man at the construction site around 8 a.m. before Eva's body was found. The man was poorly dressed, walking in the rain without an umbrella, appearing as though he had been awake all night, and seemed to be searching for something before getting into a white Renault 18. Police considered her account reliable, as several other witnesses had also reported seeing a Renault 18 years earlier, which matched the fibers discovered on Eva's body. On October 28, 2013, police released a composite sketch of the suspect, created with the help of a new witness. In 1997, the man had been described as about 35 to 40 years old, 170 to 180 centimeters tall, weighing between 75 and 80 kilograms, overweight, with short brown hair, a square face and stern features, and deep-set eyes. He was wearing a white shirt with a V-neck sweater and was driving a white Renault 18 with red upholstery. A confidential phone number and email address were set up to collect tips, resulting in 100 emails received by January 1, 2014. By the end of 2013, the investigation advanced significantly when DNA from the fluids revealed that the suspect was of North African descent. Police then requested 300 North African men who had lived in Algiers in 1997 to voluntarily provide DNA samples. A former neighbor of Eva's, who had since moved to the south of France, showed a close DNA match to the killer, indicating that the DNA in question might belong to the neighbor's sibling. Further DNA testing identified a man named Ahmed Shell. On October 1, 2015, Ahmed was arrested outside his workplace in Vizelsum, France, during a joint operation between the civil police and the French gendarmerie. Ahmed Shell was born on March 1, 1963, in Taza, Morocco. In 1989, he married a 20-year-old Spanish woman in Madrid and became a Spanish citizen during the 1990s. They had one child, and Eva was 5 months pregnant when Ahmed's wife was murdered. They were not registered as residents in Algiers because they lived in a truck belonging to Ahmed's employer, where he worked as a delivery driver, roughly 4 kilometers away from the crime scene. In 1999, the Shells moved to France, where they separated on good terms but remained listed as married in Spain. In 2003, Ahmed married again, this time to a young Moroccan woman living near the Swiss border, with whom he had children. He was employed as a welder for agricultural machinery, but often had difficulties maintaining relationships with his colleagues. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Ahmed claimed that 2 unidentified men had taken him to Eva's body and forced him to touch her. However, his ex-wife contradicted this account, telling reporters that Ahmed had actually gone out with his brothers, as they frequently did on weekends. She also revealed that one of the brothers mentioned being at the same club as Eva and even speaking with her after she argued with her ex-boyfriend. Eva, however, returned to the club at 11 p.m. with her friends rather than with his brothers. Ahmed's ex-wife stated that neither she nor her brothers had been questioned by the police. She denied that Ahmed was abusive, but acknowledged that he became aggressive when intoxicated. Female colleagues and clients described Ahmed as unapproachable, hostile when drunk, and inappropriate toward women. Eva's family had minimal contact with Ahmed's brother and had never met Ahmed himself. On October 5, 2015, Ahmed attempted suicide but did not succeed, after which he agreed to be extradited to Spain for trial. At a hearing on October 13, he remained silent but submitted DNA. He was kept in custody until the DNA testing confirmed his involvement. In January 2016, the prison psychiatric unit lifted Ahmed's anti-suicide precautions. Ahmed insisted that he had been forced to touch Eva, denied any penetration, yet could not explain why his bodily fluids were found in her genital area. On January 29, 2016, Ahmed was discovered dead in his cell, having taken his own life by hanging himself with his shoelaces. The trial was officially closed on February 15, 2016. Although Eva's family finally identified their daughter's killer, they were left disheartened that he had not been held accountable for his brutal crime. Nevertheless, they believed that true justice would come in the afterlife. Eva's story remains a journey of seeking justice after tragedy. The community stands united in the search for answers for the young girl whose life was stolen. Moving on to the next case. Gabriela Elcano. Gabriela Elcano was born on May 17, 2001, in Santiago, Chile, to Federico Elcano and Carolina de los Ocampos. She was their only child and the first grandchild in a large, loving family. Her uncle Rodrigo became her godfather and was very close to her, just as her grandfather, Carlos, cherished her. Gabriela grew up in a middle-class family that valued education and provided her with a good upbringing, despite not being wealthy. When Gabriela was just 5 years old, her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother, who devoted herself to raising her. Her father remarried and had 2 younger sons, but he continued to support Gabriela and her mother financially and remained actively involved in her life. Gabriela was a kind, friendly, and open child who was somewhat shy and modest, yet she made friends easily and got along well with her peers. She had a lovely appearance that earned her admiration and delight from everyone around her. Gabriela excelled in school and loved music, dancing, and drawing, with her parents encouraging her talents. She enjoyed spending time with her younger brothers at her father's nearby house. Overall, her childhood was happy and carefree, surrounded by loving family members. At the age of 15, Gabriela fell in love for the first time with Fabian, a fellow student at her school who was only a year older. They began as a happy couple, walking hand in hand, sharing ice cream, and stealing kisses. Fabian came from a good family whose parents were well respected and wanted the best for him. However, Fabian himself was quiet and secretive, avoiding eye contact and preferring not to talk to others. Many assumed he was shy, but it is likely that he struggled with social anxiety. When Gabriela introduced Fabian to her father, he approved of the relationship, seeing Fabian as calm, responsible, and rational. Gabriela's father had a serious conversation with Fabian, asking him to take care of Gabriela and to promise not to harm her or allow others to do so. Fabian assured him that he would. Initially, their relationship was loving and calm, with Fabian genuinely attempting to be attentive and caring. However, this tranquility did not last. After a few months, Fabian's true nature surfaced, and he became controlling and cruel. He sought to dictate every aspect of Gabriela's life, grew jealous, and decided who she could and could not spend time with. He monitored her phone, demanding immediate responses to his calls and messages, and would throw tantrums if she did not comply. For the first 6 months of their relationship, Gabriella downplayed Fabian's frequent outbursts of anger and jealousy, believing they were temporary and that he would eventually return to being the kind and caring person she had fallen in love with. She tried to meet all his demands, hoping that his behavior would improve. However, Fabian only grew more aggressive and volatile over time. He began to emotionally wear Gabriella down, and his abuse eventually escalated beyond verbal aggression. He physically intimidated her, slapping her, pulling her hair, and grabbing her hands. Although these actions often left no visible marks, friends began to notice bruises on her wrists and shoulders, evidence of Fabian's rough handling. As Gabriella struggled to cope with the abuse, she became withdrawn and depressed. Her friends and family noticed the change, seeing the tears in her eyes and the sadness that replaced her former smile. She began distancing herself from others, avoiding contact with people Fabian had forbidden her from speaking to. Gabriella repeatedly attempted to have conversations with Fabian about his behavior, but these efforts were unsuccessful. Gabriella even broke up with Fabian multiple times, only to be coerced back into the relationship by him. This cycle of breakups, stalking, and threats continued for over a year. In 2017, Fabian got into trouble for physically attacking a classmate outside of school. He was accused of abuse and assault and faced potential jail time. However, the case was settled out of court, and Fabian was expelled from school, forced to complete his education through homeschooling. After this incident, Gabriella finally decided to end the toxic relationship for good. Fabian, however, refused to accept it. He apologized, made empty promises to change, and begged her to take him back. When Gabriella rejected him, Fabian resorted to stalking, blackmail, and threats in an effort to control her and maintain the relationship. He followed Gabriella at her school and home, even attempting to break into her bedroom through a window. He bombarded her with dozens of calls, texts, voice messages, and social media messages, making constant threats and tearful apologies to manipulate her. Despite his harassment, Gabriella remained firm in her decision to end the relationship. Fabian would occasionally disappear for weeks, giving Gabriella a brief sense of hope that he had finally moved on. However, he would inevitably reappear, terrorizing her and refusing to leave her alone. He followed her everywhere, appearing unexpectedly and causing disturbing scenes. As a result, Gabriella became terrified of being alone, always ensuring she was accompanied by friends or family. She would go to her mother's workplace after school so they could travel home together. When she needed to travel elsewhere, she would ask her father or uncle to escort her. This ordeal continued for months, leaving Gabriella drained and exhausted, though she tried not to show it. A series of tragic events began in early 2018 when the Alcano family was devastated by a terrible crime. A burglar broke into Federico's home, where his second wife lived, and murdered her while the children were at school and Federico was at work. The perpetrator, a neighbor with a prior criminal record, was apprehended immediately. Gabriella and her mother stepped in to support Federico and his children during this difficult time. This tragedy temporarily shifted Gabriella's attention away from Fabian, who had mysteriously disappeared around the same period. Meanwhile, Gabriella was also focused on preparing for entrance exams, driven by her ambition to attend one of Santiago's top universities and pursue a career in journalism or advertising. This tragedy was only the beginning of a series of devastating events for the Alcano family. By May 2018, Fabian, Gabriella's ex-boyfriend, began stalking her relentlessly. He would climb over her home's fence or appear at the supermarket or mall, making her feel unsafe everywhere she went. Gabriella was terrified and sent screenshots of threatening messages from Fabian to someone, pleading for help. She confessed her fear for herself and her loved ones, but chose not to tell her family about the stalking and threats, fearing that it would worry them. On June 10, 2018, the Alcano family gathered at Carlos' house to celebrate his 80th birthday. However, this joyful family event would tragically become the last day of life for Gabriella and her mother, Carolina. The evening appeared happy and uneventful, filled with laughter, music, and a large family meal. Gabriella played with her younger brothers and cousins, but seemed troubled and distant. Her uncle Rodrigo noticed her distress and asked if everything was all right, but Gabriella merely smiled sadly, shrugged, and said she was nervous without offering an explanation. Her uncle chose not to press the issue, believing she would open up when ready, though he would later deeply regret this decision. After the party, Federico drove his ex-wife and daughter home. He kissed Gabriella on the forehead, told her he loved her, and assured her that she could rely on his support in any situation. Then he returned home with his younger children. This was the last time he would see his eldest daughter and his first wife alive. At around 4 a.m. on June 11th, Fabian, armed with a hunting knife, jumped over the fence of his ex-girlfriend Gabriella's house. He intended to sneak into her bedroom through the window and attack her. Just as he was about to enter, the lights turned on and the back door creaked open. Carolina, Gabriella's mother, had been awakened by the noise and was checking on the commotion. Fabian attacked her, pushing her back inside and stabbing her repeatedly. In total, he inflicted 36 stab wounds, primarily to her chest, neck, and head, leaving her no chance of survival. Carolina managed to scream briefly, which awakened Gabriella, who rushed downstairs to investigate. As she descended, she saw Fabian, covered in blood and enraged. He grabbed her and dragged her down. Gabriella desperately tried to call emergency services on her phone, but Fabian stopped her. He then stabbed her in the chest, piercing her heart, which proved fatal. Fabian moved Gabriella's body to the kitchen, where Carolina's lifeless body lay. He attempted to erase his traces by wiping fingerprints and cleaning bloody footprints. He then washed himself and the murder weapon in the bathroom. Finally, he quietly left the house around 5:30 a.m., unnoticed by neighbors. After Carolina failed to appear for work for 2 days and did not answer her phone, her colleagues became concerned. She was a responsible person and would not simply disappear without reason. Her boss contacted Federico, her partner, to ask if he knew what had happened. Federico was shocked and tried calling Carolina, but her phone went unanswered. He also tried calling his daughter Gabriella, but her phone was turned off. He then contacted his brother Rodrigo, who had not seen or spoken to the two since Carlos' birthday party. Federico rushed to Carolina's house, which appeared empty, though the car remained in the garage. He walked around the house, knocking on doors and peering through windows, but he refrained from going inside, even though he had a spare key. Instead, he called the police and asked them to check the house. When the officers arrived, they wondered why Federico had not used his spare key to enter. Federico admitted that he had been afraid of what he might find inside. At 11 a.m., he finally opened the door and went in with the officers. That was when they discovered the bodies of Carolina and Gabriella on the kitchen floor. They had been dead for over a day. Overwhelmed with grief, Federico desperately called for an ambulance, pleading for someone to save his loved ones. However, the officers had to calm him down, and his agitated behavior raised suspicions. As a result, he was taken outside to a police car for further questioning. When Federico tried to leave the car and found the door locked, he demanded to know why. It was then that he realized he was being treated as the prime suspect in a double murder investigation. Rodrigo soon arrived at the scene and was shocked to see that his brother was being held by the police. He was devastated by the news of his niece's death and could not understand why no ambulance or medical assistance was being provided. Both Federico and Rodrigo were taken in for questioning, and their alibis were thoroughly examined. Fortunately, they were eventually cleared of any wrongdoing, as it was established that they had been with their family at the time of the crime. Further investigation revealed that Gabriella had been stalked by her ex-boyfriend, with friends providing evidence in the form of threatening messages and voice recordings. Federico remembered the obsessed suitor his daughter had tried to break up with, but he never imagined that the seemingly harmless boy she had introduced to him was capable of such a horrific crime. The police investigation into Fabian Caesar, the young man, revealed that he had disposed of the murder weapon and thrown away clothes stained with blood. Despite this, his shoes still contained tiny drops of blood, and the pattern on the soles matched prints found at the crime scene. Additionally, 4 of Gabriella's classmates came forward, stating that they had heard Fabian threaten Gabriella, saying he would rather kill her than let her go. As the evidence and witness statements accumulated, Fabian was forced to admit to the crime. However, he attempted to portray himself as a lovesick individual who had not intended to harm Gabriella, claiming that he had only wanted to speak with her. He asserted that events spiraled out of control and that he ended up dealing with her mother, who had unfortunately become an unintended witness. After completing the autopsies and necessary tests, authorities returned the victims' bodies to their families for burial. At the funeral, Hundreds of people gathered to pay their respects and offer condolences to the grieving families. Gabriella was buried in the white dress she had always wished to wear, while Carolina's casket was closed due to the severe mutilation of her face. Fabian's family hired an experienced lawyer who constructed a strong defense, promising a reduced sentence during the preliminary hearings. The lawyer emphasized Fabian's young age and clean criminal record, arguing that the earlier dispute with his classmate had been resolved out of court. However, the victim's family insisted that Fabian be charged with femicide. The prosecution rejected this charge, as under Chilean law, femicide only applies when the perpetrator and victim are spouses or live together, which was not the case for the two teenagers. Fabian's lawyer argued that he had acted impulsively and under distress, which could result in a potential 15-year sentence for double homicide and assault. The Alcano family, understandably, demanded the harshest possible punishment for him. Following the initial court hearings, the judge granted both the prosecution and defense 6 months to gather evidence. Fabian's lawyer requested that he be released pending trial, but the judge denied the request, keeping Fabian in custody. Gabriella's father was furious, having lost 3 women close to him to violent deaths. The defense attempted to shift blame onto the victims, and the authorities appeared willing to consider this. In response, Gabriella's father and uncle, together with women's rights organizations, drafted a proposal for Gabriella's law. This legislation would expand the definition of femicide to include cases in which the victims were in romantic relationships with their killers, even if they were neither married nor living together. The proposed bill faced opposition because it would allow perpetrators already serving prison sentences for similar crimes to face new charges and lose eligibility for early release. Nevertheless, feminist organizations across the country supported the Alcano family, staging marches and demonstrations advocating for Gabriella's law. In August 2019, over a year after the devastating murders, Chile's government introduced amendments to its femicide law. These amendments, known as Gabriella's law, included 15 key changes that were later approved by Congress. Under the new law, femicide is defined as any violent act, injury, or murder committed against a woman due to gender-based hatred, regardless of her relationship with the perpetrator. The law also considers additional circumstances, such as the victim being a minor or having health issues, as aggravating factors. In April 2022, Fabian Ceres went on trial for the attack on his ex-girlfriend and her mother that occurred 4 years earlier. Thanks to Gabriella's law, the defense had no grounds to challenge the charges. Fabian was subsequently convicted of femicide under aggravating circumstances, as one of the victims was a minor, and was also found guilty of double homicide and assault. On April 20th, Fabian was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Moving on to the next case. Liga Scromine. India is the only country in the world where cultural and religious traditions have continued uninterrupted since ancient times, which is likely why it draws tourists from all over the globe. In our story, however, we will examine India like a coin with 2 different sides. On April 20th, 2018 at dawn, 2 young men went fishing along the river toward a mangrove forest. They took a long boat ride downstream until they reached a remote and quiet area. One of them jumped into the water to tie up the boat, but was distracted by a strong, acrid odor nearby. They went ashore and followed the smell, which led them to a horrifying discovery. There was something resembling a human body hanging from a tree branch, with a skull lying nearby. The men abandoned the boat and rushed to the nearest village to report the dreadful find. A team of investigators, forensic experts, and police officers quickly arrived at the scene. The experts confirmed that the suspended body was indeed human. It was evident that it had been hanging for a long time and had already begun decomposing. The flesh on the arms and legs had torn away, and the skull lay close by. Next to the body were packs of cigarettes, bottled drinking water, and a lighter, likely belonging to the victim. An investigation was conducted at the scene that same morning. The evidence discovered was collected, and the remains were sent for further examination. The small remnants of clothing that could be identified revealed that Liga Scromine, a 33-year-old hiker, was the victim. But who was Liga Scromine, and what had happened to her on the riverbank? Liga Scromine was born in Latvia in 1986. She grew up in a large, friendly family, with an older brother and a younger sister. The sisters were very close, sharing all joys and hardships from childhood. As she grew older, Liga moved to Ireland, but always maintained close ties with her family. It was in Ireland that she met Andrew Jordan. Their connection was not love at first sight, as the modest Liga had difficulty communicating with new people. But after 5 years, Liga and Andrew married and began making plans for their future. Despite working in a hotel and leading a modest lifestyle, Liga dreamed of opening her own center for yogic retreats in Portugal. Andrew supported her ambition, and together they saved money for 4 years to achieve their dream. But fate had other plans. In early 2018, Liga was suffering from an aggravated skin condition that caused her both physical discomfort and emotional strain. To help her sister overcome this ailment and restore her emotional balance, her sister Ilza invited Liga on a trip. In February 2018, Liga and Ilza traveled to Tiruvananthapuram, the capital of Kerala, so that Liga could receive Ayurvedic treatment for depression. Kovalam is Kerala's premier Ayurvedic resort. The name Kovalam, which means grove of coconut palms in Hindi, refers to a small village that offers everything needed for a comfortable and complete rest and treatment. Ayurveda is the oldest system of medical knowledge, originating more than 5,000 years ago. It is based on the universal laws of nature and the unity of all things in the world. Ayurvedic programs are designed to help restore balance and harmony in the body. Panchakarma is considered the best Ayurvedic program for modern humans in Kerala, as it effectively rejuvenates the body. Many who undergo the Panchakarma course in Kerala repeat it annually, and for good reason. Regular Panchakarma not only helps eliminate excess weight, but also contributes to decades of healthier living. Since 1985, Ayurveda has been recognized by the World Health Organization as one of the most effective systems of alternative medicine globally. It should be emphasized, however, that all the claimed benefits of Ayurveda are alternative remedies, not guaranteed solutions for longevity or perfect health. The 33-year-old Liga and her sister came to Kerala seeking spiritual renewal, hoping to alleviate depression at one of the Ayurveda centers. Their 6-week treatment program included yoga classes, meditation, therapeutic herbal drinks, as well as dietary guidance and massages. The sisters were treated together at an Ayurvedic clinic in Kovalam, Kerala, and had already completed much of their course. On the morning of March 14th, Liga declined to attend yoga class with her sister, citing a headache. When Ilza returned to her room, Liga was nowhere to be found. With assistance from the hotel staff, it was discovered that Liga had left the hotel around 11:30 a.m., wearing leggings and a yoga t-shirt, had hired an auto rickshaw, and gone to Kovalam Beach for a walk. The beaches around Kovalam are popular destinations for both domestic and international tourists. The sandy shores of Kovalam are almost always crowded. However, despite searching, Liga could not be located there. Liga wandered along the beach until late at night, showing her sister's picture to anyone she could, but never received the long-awaited response that someone had seen her. This was especially unusual, as Liga was a tall, fair-skinned woman who would have stood out, making it unlikely that she could have been on the beach unnoticed. After an unsuccessful search, Ilza went to the police station to report her sister missing. However, the Indian police showed little sympathy for the missing foreign tourist. On the contrary, they complacently assured her that the girl had likely wandered off and would surely return the next day. They were not even concerned by the fact that, according to Ilza, Liga had psychological issues, making her vulnerable to criminals. A case was officially registered, but the investigation began coldly, or more accurately, barely began at all. Liga had traveled extensively in Kerala, visiting Kovalam, Varkala, and finally returning to Kovalam. She considered herself an experienced traveler in India and had brought her sister along to show her the country she loved. But this trip turned tragic. After several days of police inaction, Ilza began searching on her own, enlisting friends' help and notifying Liga's husband, Andrew, who flew urgently to India. The police investigation gained momentum only after Liga's husband, Andrew Jordan, and Ilza contacted local media and launched an online campaign to find her. Liga also reached out via Twitter to India's foreign minister, Sushma Swaraj, writing, "Please help my sister, a Latvian citizen, who has been missing for 8 days. We are very worried." The desperate sister offered a reward of 100,000 rupees to anyone who could help locate Liga or provide information about her movements that day. Liga's friend Alexa, who had also traveled to India after hearing about her disappearance, joined in the search. Together, they posted flyers in the Kovalam beach area where Liga was last seen and distributed them to locals. Numerous residents actively participated in the search for the missing tourist. An important factor was that Liga suffered from depression and had difficulty interacting with strangers. On the day she disappeared, she had hired an auto rickshaw to reach the beach and was never seen again. She had approximately 8,000 rupees with her but no passport, meaning she could not leave the country. Shop Kumar, head of the local police station, stated that the authorities had no leads in the case. The police repeatedly claimed that the tourist had gone on an adventure or eloped and would return on her own soon. However, persistent appeals for help from Liga and Andrew eventually compelled the police to conduct a search for Liga. The operation focused on the Kovalam beach area, where Liga Scromane was last seen. Police speculated that she may have drowned, especially after an unidentified female body was discovered washed ashore at Kachal in Kanyakumari district. Investigators examined the body in the presence of Liga's sister, who did not identify it as her sibling. The drowning theory remained unconfirmed, and the search for Liga continued. Andrew, meanwhile, was convinced that his wife had been abducted by local gangs for human trafficking purposes. He attempted to infiltrate these gangs to gather information, but was discovered and warned that further contact would force him to leave the country. Even a month after Liga went missing, no new leads had emerged. Liga's sister continued her search, visiting Kovalam Beach daily and observing people closely. On one such day, she noticed a boat and theorized that the only way to leave the beach unnoticed would be by water. On April 17, 2018, after a brief hiatus, Andrew returned to India to resume the search. Together, Liga's sister and Andrew entered a renewed struggle to find Liga Scromane, yet her body remained undiscovered. The search was complicated by the fact that Liga was a foreign tourist. The Latvian Foreign Ministry stated that the embassy maintained constant contact with Liga's relatives and worked closely with the Indian police. They also appealed to the Indian Foreign Ministry for special assistance in locating Liga, involving the Honorary Consul of Latvia in India, whose consular district covered the region of her disappearance. At the request of the Kerala state government, the Indian Navy and Air Force joined the search for the missing Latvian citizen. The operation employed an An-32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boats, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. Despite these extensive efforts, the search did not yield results, and Liga remained missing. Over time, all local residents became aware of the missing tourist from Latvia and showed support and sympathy for Andrew and her family. On April 20, 2018, Liga received the long-awaited but most horrifying call of her life. A body had been discovered in the mangrove forest. She and Andrew drove to the designated location, where the police were waiting. During the boat crossing, Liga's heart pounded like never before, as if she had to mentally trace the path her sister had taken to her tragic end. On the spot, horror overwhelmed her. Liga saw her sister's clothes. She recognized the shirt and leggings on the body, but the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liga. It remained unclear how, with whom, and why. Liga had gotten to a place that could only be accessed by going through Panader from Samudra Beach. 2 women confirmed that they had witnessed Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But why would a girl who was being treated for depression and already alone take a boat to a remote place in the forest? The body was shifted to the Medical College Hospital, where it underwent an autopsy, which was captured on video camera. Police said they could not confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was completed. According to the city police commissioner, the body was badly mutilated with the head lying nearby. Police tentatively identified the dead woman as missing tourist Liga Scromane. In favor of the investigators' conclusions is also the fact that Liga's relatives identified the victim by her hair and clothes. One of the versions put forward by rescue services in India was poisoning. There are poisonous pong trees in the mangrove forest, and she could have accidentally or intentionally eaten their fruit and poisoned herself. Between 1989 and 1999, more than 500 people died from poisoning by its fruits in Kerala alone. However, this theory seemed nonsensical because the person was found hanging upside down, but there was no head. It is obvious that if Liga had been poisoned, her body would have been in a completely different position and the head would have been in place. The Indian authorities were talking utter nonsense. Based on the information about Liga's complex psychological problems, the investigators also considered the possibility that Liga had voluntarily taken her own life. Liga feared that the police would try to pass off her sister's murder as a voluntary departure from life. Although a rope had been found at the scene, and it could be concluded that the hiker had hanged herself, Liga demanded a separate explanation for the missing head. "Don't tell me it's lost," Liga said sarcastically in yet another appeal on the internet. Breathlessly, Liga and the anxious public waited for the results of the forensic tests. The forensic results were overwhelming. The report stated that there were areas of blood pooling in part of Liga Skrman's brain, as well as bruising in the neck area. The autopsy revealed that the woman had been strangled by several people and was killed in an attempted violent attack. There were external injuries on the body, probably sustained during the struggle. However, the fact of violence could not be definitively confirmed as the body was in the decomposition stage. There were characteristic injuries on the cartilage in her throat, which indicated that someone had forcefully squeezed her throat. The trauma sustained by Liga Skrman was severe enough to be fatal, according to forensic experts. Blood clots in her brain confirmed strangulation, and bruises were observed on her neck and legs. In total, 9 wounds were recorded on her body. Given this evidence, the police no longer considered the possibility of voluntary death. The autopsy indicated that Liga had been murdered while resisting or struggling. Her sister, Ilza, breathed a sigh of relief, hoping the authorities would soon apprehend her sister's killers. However, complications arose during the investigation. The police began scrutinizing local drug dealers and card players. During interviews with residents, 2 women reported seeing Liga walking alone toward the location where her body was later discovered, though authorities admitted they did not fully trust these accounts. Liga's relatives criticized the Indian police for perceived incompetence, arguing that an immediate search could have prevented the tragedy. It was believed that the 33-year-old Latvian tourist had been abducted from a nearby beach, transported by boat, and then strangled. A specialized investigative team was deployed, interviewing approximately 40 suspects. Arrests were made a few days later once sufficient evidence had been gathered. The Indian police apprehended 2 men accused of killing Liga Skrman. Investigators revealed that the victim had been lured by the 2 men, abused, and ultimately dismembered. The accused were local dealers involved in illegal substances and reportedly confessed fully under torture. Police stated that both men were pimps and engaged in illicit drug activities. The autopsy yielded limited evidence due to the advanced decomposition of Liga's body. Andrew Jordan, Liga's husband, filed a petition in the Superior Court seeking a review of the felony murder case. He believed additional individuals were involved in the crime and contended that the defendant's confessions were coerced through torture, a practice he claimed is common in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied his petition due to a lack of direct evidence. The trial was postponed for 2 months, leaving Andrew outraged at the authorities' approach to the case. He had previously accused the Kerala authorities and police of incompetence and of attempting to cover up Liga's murder to avoid frightening tourists. Both suspects requested and were granted a legal postponement of the case, as the law allows them to delay it once without providing a reason. The repeated delays only reinforced his belief that the case was mishandled. Nevertheless, both suspects remained in custody. Investigations revealed that 32-year-old Umesh and 28-year-old Ajay had offered Liga Skrman drugs, and after she was incapacitated, they strangled and decapitated her. It is notable that the 2 men had previously committed similar crimes on multiple occasions. Both men were employed by a food delivery company in Kerala's capital and earned additional income as illegal tour guides. Umesh and Ajay were charged with destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The location where Liga's body was discovered had previously served as a recreational spot for Umesh, who used it to bring men there. Umesh faced 13 criminal cases, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of his previous victims testified against him. Liga Skrman had been seen in the area with both men by multiple witnesses. Initially, the suspects remained silent, but confessed after the body was found. They admitted to the police that they had committed the murder during an act of violence. While in custody, they initially claimed to have only encountered Liga in Kovalam. After repeated interrogations, both men pleaded guilty. On December 6, 2022, the court sentenced them to life imprisonment and ordered each to pay compensation of 65,000 rupees to Liga's sister, Ilza. It is important to note that India has recently seen a series of similar crimes, with young girls frequently subjected to violence, highlighting the severity of the country's crime problem. In response to the rising number of sexual offenses against minors, the government has implemented the death penalty. It is also significant that if Liga's relatives, especially her sister, had not been persistent, engaging the press, holding a press conference, and involving an influential MP, the local police might not have seriously investigated the case. Initially, authorities speculated that Liga had voluntarily disappeared, but this was proven false. Moreover, this was not the first incident at the site where Liga was found. This story serves as a cautionary warning. Women should exercise extreme caution when traveling alone in India. Do not seek spiritual enlightenment in remote, dangerous, or unfamiliar places. Always prioritize your safety. Moving on to the next case. Maricela Botella. A nighttime walk becomes a tragic crime. Going out with someone you barely know is usually a poor choice that often ends badly, especially when you are in an unfamiliar city and the meeting happened only a couple of hours earlier at a local entertainment spot. It is not always the case, though not ruled out either, that the casual acquaintance will turn out to be a murderer, attacker, or thief, but they might either accidentally or deliberately involve you in problems or even cause a calamity. An American student named Maricela Botella Valadez intended simply to enjoy herself at a popular nightclub where she unexpectedly encountered an up-and-coming rapper who showed interest in her and proposed they continue the night in a more intimate atmosphere. However, the new acquaintance was already tied to a relationship, and a complicated one at that. He was part of an unusual romantic triangle, and the other members did not appreciate the sudden arrival of the young beauty. Her simple trust cost the young woman her life, yet the matter turned out to be far from simple. It involved furious jealousy, the urge to hold on to fading youth, occult rituals, and even an international hunt for runaway offenders. Nevertheless, owing to the monumental efforts of the investigators, it became possible to locate every person involved in the crime and determine the role of each. What is known regarding Maricela? Maricela Botella Valadez was born in 1997 in Seattle, the largest city within Washington state. She was the eldest of two siblings in a family of Latin American heritage, raised with her younger brother. Those who knew her described her as a kind, sociable young woman who always had numerous friends, succeeded well in school, and after finishing, enrolled as a student at a renowned university. Furthermore, Maricela was considered genuinely beautiful, a petite, slim brunette with wide brown eyes, gorgeous hair, and a flawless figure. She constantly attracted many admirers, loved being the center of attention, enjoyed lively gatherings where she could celebrate, and valued every day. On Saturday, October 3, 2020, the student traveled to Dallas to meet with old friends. However, by Monday morning, she was scheduled to return. Her brother was meant to meet her at the airport on October 5th, after which they would go to the university together, but the plane landed without her. When all passengers from the flight arriving from Dallas had exited the airport, her brother realized that Maricela was not among them. Worried, the young man attempted to call his sister, but her phone was switched off. He then contacted their parents to inform them of the situation. Since Maricela was a diligent and dependable young woman, it was unlike her to vanish without notice and fail to attend her university classes. The family began reaching out to her friends in Dallas, attempting to learn where she could have gone and when she was last seen. It was discovered that the night before, she had been at one of the city's most popular clubs, where she met a black man named Chuck. The two danced, enjoyed themselves, and consumed alcoholic drinks, after which they left together. Maricela was not seen again, and her phone remained unanswered. This information deeply alarmed and terrified her parents, leading them to immediately report her disappearance to the police. It was confirmed that the young woman had indeed purchased tickets for a flight to Seattle, yet for some unknown reason, she had not boarded the plane. No one had seen her since that evening, and no one knew where she could be. It became necessary to determine who Maricela's new acquaintance was, where they had gone, and whether she had accompanied him willingly. Reviewing recordings from external security cameras positioned around the club, investigators observed the missing student leaving with a young man whose face could not be clearly identified in the footage. Based on the video, she seemed to be walking with him of her own will. The pair entered a black Audi vehicle and drove away in an unspecified direction. The enigmatic new companion. Since the disappearance of 23-year-old Botella Valadez, several days had gone by, and she had still not contacted anyone, nor had she accessed her social media accounts, and no activity had been recorded on her bank cards. The police needed to identify the unknown man she had left with as quickly as possible in order to know where to search for them. One of her missing friends stated that her companion might have been called Chuck, but that detail was not sufficient. Soon, with the help of street surveillance footage, it was possible to establish the direction the vehicle had taken. Furthermore, it was revealed that the pair had stopped at a supermarket, where they were also captured on video. Both appeared cheerful, smiling, and displaying affection toward each other. The young woman selected several drinks and sweets, and the young man paid for everything at the register using a card bearing the name Charles Beltran. Thus, it became evident who Maricela had departed with. Beltran was a 31-year-old musician and even regarded as an emerging local rap star. However, the man had a criminal history, having been imprisoned twice for robbery and armed assault. He served less than 3 years and was released on parole. Recently, his career had been on an upward path, and he was even preparing to launch his own music album. Soon, investigators discovered where Charles resided, and by checking the mobile carrier's data, it was revealed that the missing student's phone had been active at the location on that fatal night. Yet the residence belonged to a woman named Lisa Dyke, while the musician was merely renting a room from her. The very unusual house. When police, accompanied by an FBI agent assigned to investigate the girl's disappearance, visited the address, the residence was deserted. They managed only to reach Lisa Dyke by phone, as she insisted she was out of state on business. She confirmed that Charles Beltran had indeed been renting a room in her home, but claimed he had moved out a couple of weeks earlier, and she had no knowledge of his present location. Since law enforcement could not locate or reach the only suspect, they secured a warrant to search the house where he had stayed. What awaited them inside was a set of shocking and disturbing discoveries. The residence was in disarray, with disorder and filth everywhere. It appeared as though the occupants had departed hastily, taking only the most essential items and leaving all else scattered. The kitchen sink overflowed with dirty dishes, decayed food scraps remained on the table, and garbage was strewn in the corners. Notably, amid all the disorder, many empty bottles of cleaning and detergent products were found lying around, with traces on the floors and carpets as if something had been rigorously scrubbed. In one of the upstairs rooms, an unusual and even ominous black figure of death, cloaked in black and holding a scythe, stood. It might have been mistaken for an eccentric decorative item, yet it was arranged as a kind of altar with wax candles, dried flowers, and 2 metal bowls. It resembled the Mexican religious cult of Santa Muerte, translated as Holy Death, where a female deity symbolizing death is venerated. The house and the atmosphere inside appeared more than merely odd. It felt as though something dreadful had taken place here, and afterward the residents hastily cleaned, packed only necessities, and abruptly escaped. To verify this, a more detailed inspection was carried out using specialized equipment to detect blood traces. This uncovered numerous wiped bloodstains on the floor of one bedroom, in the bathroom, and in the hallway. It was later determined that the bedroom where the carpet was nearly saturated with blood belonged to Charles, and it seemed that a brutal crime had occurred there. But who was the victim? The missing young woman, the tenant himself, or another individual? Despite every effort to remove the evidence, the blood had penetrated the flooring, seeped beneath the baseboards, and stained both wallpaper and furniture. Forensic experts compared the samples found with Maricela's DNA, and any lingering doubts were eliminated. The blood was hers. The residence was sealed as a crime scene, but the urgent task now was to locate the main suspect, potential accomplices, and witnesses. This assignment was far from simple. As it emerged, Charles had fled, and the owner, even before the police visit, had hurriedly listed the house for sale. Therefore, authorities decided to uncover as much as possible about everyone who had recently lived there. The love triangle. Neighbors disclosed that 3 people occupied the house: 57-year-old Lisa Dyke, 48-year-old Nina Morano, and 31-year-old Charles Beltran. Yet the nature of their relationship and their sudden disappearance stayed uncertain. It became necessary to investigate each person's history and track them down for questioning as soon as possible. The homeowner, the only one reachable by telephone, had practiced for many years as a lawyer, known to be authoritative, ambitious, and rather contentious. She had been married 3 times, and after becoming a widow several years earlier, received a considerable inheritance. There was no financial reason for her to rent a room to some man, nor was Lisa recognized for her generosity, which implied she had another motive in the matter. The young black man named Charles, or simply Chuck Beltran, aspired to break into the music world to pursue a rap career, yet he lacked both funds and influential contacts, while his criminal past stood in the way. About a year prior, however, he encountered Dyke, who invited him into her house, helped establish a small recording studio there, and even financed the production of several music videos for the budding rapper. In addition, she purchased him a car, covered his leisure expenses, and provided stylish clothing. All the while, she maintained that their relationship was entirely professional and that she recognized tremendous promise in this gifted young man. The money she spent on him, she insisted, was an investment. The situation with Nina Morano was even more captivating. She and Lisa had been romantically involved for a long period, and after Dyke was widowed, she no longer concealed her affair with her partner. Furthermore, a few months earlier, the women officially formalized their union by marrying. Nina then moved into her spouse's home, where Charles was already residing. According to one of her close friends, Lisa had an intimate relationship with the young musician. Though she adamantly denied it, she secretly confided to her friend about how extraordinary a lover he was. Evidently, she had fallen for him, because after their involvement began, Dyke made frantic efforts to appear younger. She shed 55 pounds, altered her appearance, began using bold makeup, and even acquired several colorful tattoos. Most significantly, she forced her own children out of the house, reasoning that they were already old enough and interfered with her private life. Clearly, Chuck also had a personal interest in living with a wealthy, albeit older partner, since she resolved all his financial struggles and supported his pursuit of a music career. However, he was a striking, handsome man in good physical condition, and women did not overlook him. He frequently engaged in short affairs with young women, which drove Lisa mad with jealousy. Yet what part did Nina Morano play in this entire affair, and particularly in the case of Maricella's disappearance? According to the same close friend, Lisa's spouse was part of this strange love triangle and was the only woman with whom Dyke not only allowed her young lover to sleep, but even insisted on it. Nina was also a successful lawyer and a very affluent woman. Thus, this trio lived in pleasure, sparing nothing. Interestingly, after their wedding, both women took the boy's last name, so the house was occupied by Charles, Lisa, and Nina Beltran. Where did the house's inhabitants vanish to? It was discovered that since the student's disappearance, no one had been seen at the house where her blood was found. Lisa was only contacted once. She answered a few questions, stated she was in another state, and thereafter her phone went unanswered. Nothing was known about the fate and whereabouts of Nina, as well as the main suspect, Charles. By tracking mobile phone signals, it was determined that on the night of October 5th, all three inhabitants, as well as the missing Maricela, were in the house. By early morning, their device signals had moved to a suburban area of Dallas in a fairly deserted wooded area. Then the signals disappeared, and a few days later, Lisa only responded from her second work phone, which later also became unreachable. The mutilated remains. Using geolocation data from the mobile devices, the route taken that night by the sought-after group was traced, and the stops they made were identified. It was presumed that somewhere in this area, they might have disposed of the missing student's body. This defined a broad search radius, but the area was vast and difficult to navigate, so progress was slow despite efforts. Closer to the new year, the search operation was halted as neither the body nor any clues were found. However, in March 2021, a local hunter wandering through the woods stumbled upon a human skull that appeared relatively fresh. He promptly reported his find to the police, and the remains were soon brought to a forensic laboratory for necessary examinations. Dental records confirmed that the body belonged to the Seattle student who had been missing for nearly half a year. However, the advanced state of decomposition and damage caused by wild animals made it impossible to establish the exact cause of death. Notably, several characteristic marks on the bones suggested knife wounds, but it was unclear whether these were the fatal injuries. Soon after the grim discovery in the forest, authorities managed to track down Lisa, who had moved to Florida with Nina and rented a house in Miami by the ocean. Unfortunately, only Nina could be apprehended, while her spouse, learning about the situation, hurriedly went into hiding. There were no traces of Charles, although he periodically communicated with former girlfriends via messengers. In her last correspondence, Dyke mentioned that the young woman's body had been found and warned everyone to be extremely cautious as the police were on their trail. Nina, now incarcerated, refused to provide any information, claiming she knew nothing about Maricella's fate. Meanwhile, Lisa, using all her connections, attempted to hire a good lawyer for her spouse. It also emerged that while in Florida, Nina had put her house in South Carolina up for sale, trying to liquidate it as quickly as possible. It was likely that the women needed the money to continue hiding or to leave the country altogether. A month later, authorities successfully located and arrested Lisa, after which both women were transported back to Gallus. Initial interrogations yielded no results, and a bail of $500,000 was set for each suspect. They managed to post the significant amount and were released under house arrest. However, the women were fitted with tracking bracelets, which allowed their whereabouts to be monitored. A bold escape attempt. In August of the same year, police traced Charles to Utah, hiding at the house of one of his ex-girlfriends. The woman, who was raising a 5-year-old son fathered by Beltran, was so pleased that the child's father had returned to her that she didn't question the reasons for his unexpected decision. The arrested man initially refused to testify or cooperate with the police. He still hoped that his wealthy lover, using her money and connections, would hire a good lawyer for him and help him avoid prison. But soon the situation drastically changed. On Christmas Eve of December 2021, the tracking bracelets worn by Lisa and Nina, who had been released on bail, suddenly went offline. Due to holiday chaos and high activity, it took until the next day to send a squad to their location, but by then the suspects were nowhere to be found. It soon turned out that they had been meticulously planning their escape for months, and by the time the police went after them, they had already illegally crossed the border into Mexico. From there, they flew to South Korea, and their trail was lost in Cambodia. The FBI was once again involved in the investigation, working with the Cambodian police and immigration services to track down the fugitive suspects. The women came under law enforcement's radar, withdrawing a large sum of money from an ATM. They tried to pay in cash everywhere to avoid revealing their whereabouts. ATM cameras helped identify the fugitives, and another camera on a neighboring building captured the license plate number of the car they arrived in. This information led to the driver, who took the police to the house rented by the extravagant foreigners. The women were rearrested and extradited to the U.S. in February 2022, where justice was to be served. This time, bail was denied and they were sent directly to jail, Charles's candid confessions. By then, Chuck had fully realized that his lover was not going to save him from prison and was only concerned about herself, leading him to express a desire to cooperate with the investigation and start providing information. His account of the events of that dreadful night horrified many. Beltran confessed that he had been in an intimate relationship with the homeowner, Lisa, and her spouse, Nina. According to him, he engaged in these relationships for money and the opportunity to advance his music career. He harbored no warm feelings towards these women and often indulged in affairs with young and attractive women, which he never hid. While Nina was indifferent to his actions, Lisa sometimes became wildly jealous. On the fateful night of October 5, 2020, Chuck met a young student named Maricela at a nightclub. The beautiful, slender girl immediately caught his attention, and it seemed he caught hers as well. After spending several hours drinking cocktails and dancing, he invited her over, and she agreed. When they arrived at his place late at night, Nina and Lisa were already asleep, so Charles easily took the girl to his room. There, the couple engaged in intimate activities and later fell asleep. According to the suspect, in the middle of the night, Lisa entered his room, and seeing the young beauty asleep next to him, flew into a jealous rage. She went to the kitchen to grab a large knife, then returned and leaped onto Maricela, repeatedly striking her. Charles claimed he was awakened by the noise and was disoriented at first, still somewhat intoxicated. When he finally turned on the light, he was confronted with a horrific scene. Maricela's body had slid to the floor next to the bed where she had bled out. At that moment, Nina entered the room. They simply stood there for several minutes, and no one attempted to assist the victim. When Chuck regained his senses, he realized that the crime could be blamed on him, since he already had a criminal record and his powerful lovers might avoid punishment. That is why, he explained, he agreed to help dispose of the body and conceal the crime. Charles stayed with friends for a few days, and upon returning to gather his belongings, he observed that the bloodstains on the floor and carpet had nearly vanished. Lisa informed him that she and Nina had handled everything and destroyed the evidence of the crime. Nevertheless, All three concluded that it was best to leave the city for a while and observe from a distance what might unfold. Lisa Dyke Beltran's version. Lisa's attorney argued that his client had no reason to attack the girl or take her life. She asserted that her involvement with Chuck was strictly professional and that she considered his budding music career a sound investment. Whom he slept with or flirted with never mattered to her. As a principal point, the defense highlighted that Dyke had recently married and was content with Morano. However, no one could clarify why, after their wedding, the women suddenly chose to adopt the surname of their young tenant, who, according to them, held no significance. At the trial, Lisa alleged that Charles was quick-tempered and extremely violent, and when intoxicated, he turned into a monster whom she feared. According to her account, that night he brought a new girl from the club, but after they were intimate, an argument erupted and Chuck, in a frenzy, seized a knife. She and Nina ran toward the commotion and tried to separate them, but it was already too late. Maricela was dead. They assisted in disposing of the body and cleaning the scene under the threat of becoming his next targets. Lisa's friend, who testified in court, stated that Lisa was completely obsessed with Chuck and had repeatedly confessed to her an uncontrollable urge to eliminate any woman who came near her young lover. Clearly, she was unable to control her emotions that evening. In addition, the witness referred to the strange statue of Santa Muerte at her friend's residence. She remembered being startled by the improvised altar during a visit, but the homeowner jokingly claimed she practiced black magic and knew how to perform a spell that would make a man look only at her. Yet it appears the ritual failed, and the woman instead turned to a knife. Another witness, a real estate agent approached by the women shortly after the incident, stated that they were desperate to sell several of their properties as fast as possible. They also wanted to put their Dallas residence up for sale. But because it was the scene of the alleged crime, they could not do so while the investigation remained active. The matter intensified when the body of the missing young woman was uncovered, after which Lisa and Nina were prepared to sell the property at half its value merely to obtain money quickly. The court considered Charles's complete confession and his willingness to assist with the investigation. However, the situation for the fugitives deteriorated after their attempt to escape to another continent. In March 2023, Lisa Dyke Beltran was convicted of the savage crime against 23-year-old Maricela, hiding evidence and attempting to flee. She received a sentence of life, imprisonment without parole. As for Charles Beltran and Nina Morano, they fully confessed to their actions and agreed to cooperate with the authorities. They were convicted only of concealing evidence. Nina was given a 7-year prison term but could be released in 3 years for good behavior. Charles, previously convicted on several occasions, was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after serving 8 years. Moving on to the next case. Nicole Lobby. Nicole Lobby, 29 years old, lived with her husband Chris and had a large family in Oregon, USA. Nicole was a beautiful woman, a loving wife, an amazing mother, and a friend. She was never afraid to share her faith or her opinions with anyone. Her aim was to ensure that she left this world a better place. When Nicole met Chris, she already had an older daughter. Chris also had 2 daughters, and after their marriage, they had a son. Nicole was known for being adventurous, brave, and always looking forward. She had overcome a rare cancer and later became very passionate about fitness. Nicole's goal was to become a fitness trainer. She had recently started a new job, and no one expected that she would be in danger at work. At approximately 5 p.m. on August 19, 2014, Portland Emergency Services received a call from a man reporting that a woman had been stabbed in the chest. The victim was still alive but was struggling to breathe. The witness requested that an ambulance be sent to Timber Creek Apartments immediately. Police quickly arrived and spoke with the man who had called 911, who provided further details about the incident. He explained that he and his wife were walking down the stairs of their apartment building toward the parking lot when they heard screaming. He looked to his right and saw a woman running toward them, shouting, "He stabbed me, he stabbed me." She told the couple that she did not know her attacker, but he had been wearing camouflage pants and a black hoodie. The manager of Timber Creek Apartments identified the victim as Nicole Lobby, 29, a co-worker. Nicole was a leasing consultant and had been employed there for several weeks. On August 19th, during her working hours, she drove a trolley around the complex delivering letters requesting lease renewals. Along with each letter, Nicole handed each resident a balloon tied to a bag of popcorn. When finished, she marked each apartment on a map in the trolley. Based on Nicole's notes and the map, detectives determined that the attack may have taken place on a specific stairwell in Timber Creek at the time residents had heard Nicole screaming. The attacker may have been waiting for her under this stairwell. There was also a trail of blood leading from the stairwell and flyers scattered at the base of the stairs. During the investigation by the Washington County Sheriff's Office, several witnesses reported seeing a suspicious young man wearing a black hoodie and camouflage pants near Timber Creek at the time of the attack. By combining these reports with the timing of the sightings, detectives were able to determine the suspect's route through Timber Creek. More than 20 officers were involved in this intensive investigation, assisted by K-9 units. The Washington County Search and Rescue Team combed the woods along Cedar Mill Creek, a stream that runs through the Timber Creek complex. During the search, they discovered several items that were sent to a laboratory for analysis. Detectives did not disclose the specific findings, but stated that they were investigating every possibility. Investigators were trying to determine the cause of the attack, which occurred in broad daylight at an apartment complex housing more than 1,000 residents. Nicole's husband, Chris Lobby, was contacted and informed of the incident. The police took multiple steps to identify the attacker. It was not a robbery, and the assailant did not attempt to remove her clothing. This indicated that the motive for the attack might have been personal. This theory led detectives to focus on her husband, Chris. Chris cooperated fully with police and answered questions regarding his 4-year marriage to Nicole. Investigations confirmed that he was at daycare picking up his son at the time of the attack, making it impossible for him to have been the attacker. Meanwhile, while interviewing residents at Timber Creek Apartments, police found 2 additional witnesses who saw a man wearing a black hoodie and orange pants. They observed this man, who had features similar to the original suspect, running across the street without looking back. Around the same time that Nicole was attacked, a hooded man was seen running toward the houses across from Timber Creek Apartments. Detectives, working with witnesses, created a sketch of the suspect and quickly circulated it throughout the city, even appearing on television news. The city urged anyone who recognized the facial features to report the incident. Detectives also collaborated with informants to gather clues about the killer. The sketch produced several leads. One man stated that his son knew a man who matched the sketch. His name was Taylor, and he had recently threatened others with a knife. Police located Taylor and brought him in for questioning. Taylor said unusual things and appeared to have mental health issues. When asked about Nicole, he did not hesitate to admit that he had killed her. However, Taylor's testimony was inconsistent, as he only mentioned information that had already appeared in newspapers and included irrelevant details. Consequently, the police eliminated him as a suspect. After the suspect's sketch appeared in the newspaper, police received a tip regarding a man named Nick, who had a criminal history. Nick resembled the suspect in the sketch, but he had never committed anything similar to what happened to Nicole. He had prior legal issues, but had never physically harmed anyone. Police interviewed Nick and found his behavior concerning. When asked about Nicole and the crime, he denied involvement and requested a lawyer. Police then obtained a search warrant for Nick's home. At Nick's home, they found a black hoodie and orange pants. However, the hoodie did not match the witness description because it had a bright white logo on the front. Nick's clothing was sent for analysis, but no evidence linked him to the crime. Phone records also indicated that he had not been near the scene of the attack. As a result, police eliminated Nick as a suspect, and the case went cold. Nicole's family endured a very difficult period. In an interview with reporters, Chris Lobby shared that he could not stop thinking about what happened to Nicole. He said the hardest part was that there were so many unanswered questions. I keep thinking about what happened, different scenarios, and there are no answers to any of them, he said. Police feared that the perpetrator might strike again, and their concerns eventually became a reality. 3 weeks after Nicole's death, on September 13, 2014, the Eugene Police Department received a concerning call. Eugene is a city approximately 100 miles from Portland. On that day, a resident was attacked while leaving a bar near Autzen Stadium. Heather Miller, 39, had gone to a bar near the stadium to watch the game. Around 8 p.m., when the game ended, Heather decided to return home. The streets were nearly empty. As she left the bar, she tried to call a taxi, but discovered her phone was dead. She then chose to walk closer to the stadium to make it easier to find one. As she walked along the sidewalk, she noticed someone following her. When she crossed the street and turned around, she saw that the man behind her was still following her. She quickened her pace, but was suddenly struck on the back of the head, knocking her unconscious. When Heather regained consciousness, she found herself face to face with her attacker, who had pulled down her pants in an attempt to sexually assault her. Heather tried to reason with him, explaining that she had a daughter and begging to see her again, but he continued to beat her. Heather recounted that each time she spoke, she was punched in the face. Eventually, she realized that the only way to survive was to pretend to be dead. She closed her eyes and remained silent. When the attacker believed he had accomplished his goal, he fled. Despite the severe beating, Heather summoned the strength to stand and walk into the street. A minute later, a car stopped, and the driver called 911. An ambulance arrived and rushed Heather to the hospital. She regained consciousness and spoke with a detective who arrived shortly afterward. At that moment, neither Heather nor the detective knew that the attacker had already been apprehended at the police station. Near the scene of the attack was a park. A police officer on duty that night saw a man running, stopped him, and observed that his hands and shoes were covered in blood. The police arrested him and called a patrol car to transport him to the station. Jamie Tinoco, 17, was young but had been on the police's radar multiple times. At the time of his arrest, he was on probation for illegal possession. Jamie had been using drugs since the age of 12, and his parents had no control over him. Jamie had dropped out of high school during his freshman year and had been arrested for driving without a license the day before Heather's attack, but was released shortly afterward. During questioning, Jamie confessed to attacking Heather. He remained completely calm and nonchalant, believing he had done nothing wrong. His behavior led the Eugene Police Department to suspect that Heather was not his first victim. Police released his photograph, hoping that other women affected by him would come forward. Soon after, detectives investigating Nicole Lobby's death saw the photo of Jamie released by Eugene Police. They believed that Jamie matched the sketch of the suspect they had. Further investigation revealed that Jamie lived with his parents in Portland, and their apartment was located across the street from Timber Creek, which further fueled suspicions that he was involved in Nicole Lobby's death. Detectives questioned Jamie about Nicole's case, hoping that he would confess to assaulting her as he had admitted to attacking Heather Miller. However, Jamie insisted that he had nothing to do with Nicole's death and refused to answer any questions. Police needed to find evidence linking him to Nicole Lobby's death. As mentioned earlier, Jamie lived across the street from Timber Creek Apartments with his parents. Consequently, police obtained a search warrant for his parents' apartment. In Jamie's room, they found a black hoodie and orange pants, which were sent to a laboratory for analysis. However, the lab results were disappointing, as no trace of Nicole's DNA was found on any of Jamie's belongings, and the investigation appeared to reach a dead end. While there was no evidence proving that Jamie killed Nicole, there was sufficient evidence to connect him to the attack on Heather Miller. He did not deny his actions and seemed to take pride in being a young thug. At his trial for the attack on Heather Miller, Jamie smiled and stated that he felt no remorse for his actions. He had separated from a group of delinquent teens during a trip supervised by the Washington County Juvenile Department. He followed Heather, attacked her from behind, and dragged her into the bushes near Atson Stadium. Heather stated that she still experiences nightmares and flashbacks and had chipped her front teeth as a result of the attack. She was forced to find a new job. The injuries she sustained, including a broken nose, required reconstructive surgery to heal. "There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about what happened," she said in Lane County District Court. "I pray that Jamie will never have the chance to do this to another person and affect their life the way he affected mine." Heather Miller held the hands of 2 family members as she sat with more than a dozen supporters before reading her statement aloud. Jamie grinned in court as the victim recounted the horrifying details of the assault she endured. When the judge asked why Jamie was smiling, he replied that he did not know. The judge described Jamie's lack of remorse as appalling and labeled him a danger to the community, then imposed the maximum sentence. Heather, comforted by friends and family after the hearing, said his behavior was disrespectful and unrepentant, and that the judge's sentence was fully deserved. A courageous mother of 2, Heather pleaded with the judge to ensure that Jamie would never have the opportunity to harm another person. She did not want him to believe that he had won or brought her down, so she maintained her composure from the beginning. Although the defense attempted to portray Jamie as a young man affected by years of substance abuse, the judge noted that his behavior in court clearly reflected serious character issues. Jamie's lawyer requested that the judge sentence his client to 8 years and 4 months in prison, arguing that Jamie was remorseful for his actions. However, when the judge allowed him to speak, Jamie did not apologize and refused to make any statement. Judge Deborah Voigt sentenced Jamie to 14 years and 2 months in prison, explaining that his lack of remorse warranted the harsh sentence. "The community needs to be protected from a dangerous man like this," she said. "As much as people want me to see him as a boy, I cannot." When Jamie becomes eligible for release, he will be in his early 30s and will be required to register as a sex offender for life. As for Heather, her family stated that she is looking forward to starting a new job and moving on with her life. Meanwhile, investigators decided to exploit Jamie's ego to get him to confess. They questioned him about Nicole Lobby's death. Detectives told him that he would gain more respect in prison if other inmates knew that he was not only the coward who attacked one woman from behind, but also the one who killed another. After a few minutes of silence, Jamie began talking about Nicole, admitting that he did not intend to kill her. He claimed that he wanted to experience the sensation of stabbing someone, but did not mean to kill Nicole, only to hurt her. He stated that while walking from his apartment to Timber Creek, he saw Nicole park her car and carry a balloon to her second-floor apartment. As Nicole climbed the stairs, Jamie hid behind the car, then ran up the stairs and stabbed Nicole when she turned around. He explained that he chose Nicole because he believed she would be an easy target. When asked if he had intended to force Nicole to have sex as he did with Heather Miller, he casually replied, "Oh, I've thought about it. I would." Jamie stated that he did not go through with it because Nicole screamed when he stabbed her, prompting him to flee during the reenactment. He demonstrated to investigators how he escaped the scene. Chris Lobby said he was stunned to learn that his wife's killer was only 17. "I have a 13-year-old daughter," he said. "It's unbelievable and hard to comprehend that someone just 4 years older than her could do this." The trial began in 2015. Despite confessing during questioning, Jamie pleaded not guilty in court. His attorney argued that no DNA evidence linked him to the scene. "I'm just asking for leniency for a 17-year-old boy with a serious mental illness who has the potential to change with treatment," defense attorney Robert Axford said. The defense called only one witness, a psychologist who evaluated Jamie and concluded that he exhibited symptoms of schizophrenia. However, a psychologist at Oregon State Hospital determined that Jamie had a personality disorder, not schizophrenia. Jamie's video confession and reenactment convinced the jury of his guilt. During the reenactment, he described details that only Nicole Lobby's attacker would know. During sentencing, the jury was presented with 2 options: life in prison without parole, or life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The jury concluded that there were no mitigating circumstances sufficient to impose a life sentence with the possibility of parole. Consequently, in 2017, Jamie Tinoco was found guilty on all counts. Jamie, then 20, stood in the Washington County courtroom between his 2 attorneys when Court of Appeals Judge Kirsten Thompson asked if he had anything to say before formally sentencing him to life in prison without parole. He placed his hands down in front of his waistband, his mouth twitching slightly, and said, "I beg for forgiveness," before sitting down. Chris Lobby, Nicole's husband, stated that Jamie's family came to see his family after the sentencing to express condolences and apologize. But that was not the end of the story. In 2021, the Oregon Court of Appeals overturned Jamie's 2017 conviction. Juvenile law had changed since Tinoco was tried under a Measure 11 charge. Under the new reform, offenders aged 15 to 17 are no longer automatically sent to adult court. The law now requires prosecutors to hold a hearing to decide whether juveniles charged with serious crimes should be transferred to adult court. If the case is retried, Jamie's attorneys could request a lighter sentence. The decision to overturn the conviction came as a shock to Nicole Lobby's family, who had not anticipated it. Nicole's father, Rich Jones, said they would have to endure another emotional ordeal. Jamie remains in prison, but this is not the end of Nicole Lobby's case. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.